What up, folks? What's going on? Welcome to the Spun Today Podcast, the podcast that is anchored in writing, but unlimited in scope. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz, and I appreciate you listening. This is episode 169 of the show, and in this episode, I speak about watching the Mandalorian series on Disney+. I also speak about watching the movie Vampires vs. the Bronx on Netflix, and watching Season 3 of The Chi on Showtime. But before we get into it, here's a very quick way that you can help support this show if you so choose. Speaking of Amazon, they fulfill a bunch of the merch that I have available. If you go to spuntoday.com/support, you're going to find a brand new merch section where you'll find the iconic Podcasts vs. Anybody super soft premium cotton t-shirt. You'll also find the legendary Spun Today Podcast tee, which is in the style of the New York City plastic thank you bags logo. For my fellow Dominicans out there, I have a dope Dominican Escudo t-shirt. You know where the Lacoste or Polo shirts have their little logo? Picture that, but instead a Dominican Escudo. All available now in a variety of different colors for men and women in all sizes. In the Spun Today merch section, which again is at spuntoday.com/support, you'll also find a bunch of other t-shirt designs, long sleeve t-shirts, short sleeve t-shirts, color changing coffee mugs, and much, much more. Check out all the merch at spuntoday.com/support. The Mandalorian. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I'm not one of these Star Wars nerds that says, may the 4th be with you on July 4th or whenever it is. Probably not July 4th, right? Independence Day. It's the 4th of something, the 4th of May or the 4th of September, something like that. And I don't know all the movies and I'm not that into it, right? But this show is so good that I wish I was. Seriously, like this show drew me in so much that it makes me want to go back and see like the other, I believe it's 6 movies, like a first set of a trilogy and the second set. So I remember back in the day when, and I just looked this up to make sure I have the right year, in 2005, Star Wars Revenge of the Sith came out. That movie I saw, and I really liked it, thought it was great, and it actually made me want to get into the whole Star Wars series, and I tried going back and watching like the original trilogy, etc. But they're movies from the late 70s, early 80s, the earlier ones. I just, for whatever reason, I couldn't get into them. Maybe because like visually they're like outdated, but it's like a modern or futuristic take, but from back in the day. So I don't know, there's something off for me, but I completely get, especially from hearing firsthand accounts of, you know, folks that grew up during that time and when the movies came out back in the late 70s, early 80s, how it was like paradigm shifting and mind blowing within context, right? And what I appreciated most actually from the movie that I saw in 2005 is how, and I might get this wrong, so you heavy Star Wars fans out there, take it easy on me, how the movies are released somewhat out of sequence. And there was always a missing piece that was skipped over. And that missing piece is this movie from 2005, Revenge of the Sith, which reveals who Darth Vader is, which is like the ultimate bad guy, and how he became to be Darth Vader, etc. And it was Anakin Skywalker, which was a Jedi and the father of Luke Skywalker. I thought that was dope. Like that, the cleverness of that, of having the foresight of skipping a piece and kind of like leaving them wanting more, and having the creativity chops to go back and fill in that void perfectly. I just thought was awesome. And shout out obviously to George Lucas, the creator of the Star Wars universe, and all the other folks involved with creating something that's recognizably so epic, whether you're personally into them or not. Now, recently there's been more movies, Star Wars movies in 2015, 2017, 2019, none of which I've seen. yet, but I'm telling you, I got so into this Mandalorian series that it makes me want to. Over the years, as I understand it, there have been, other like Star Wars spin-off like cartoons and shows and content within the Star Wars orbit, pun unintended. And this Mandalorian series is one of them. It takes a deep dive look at, and this is my rudimentary understanding of it, of the lineage of one character from the second Star Wars movie, The Empire Strikes Back in 1980, which I believe was Boba Fett, and he was a Mandalorian. And this is the story of another Mandalorian many years later, whose race of people have, in large part, died off, but he's like this badass bounty hunter, lone wolf type of guy, and the story's written in, it's very much like an old Western in that sense of like the righteous lone wolf character. And I want to take a step back just to appreciate that the show was created and written by Jon Favreau, which I've come to like over the years from different movies that I've seen him act in, movies that he's directed and produced, shows that I've seen. And over time, he's definitely become one of those, like when people ask, what's your dream scenario, like dinner to have, any famous people that are alive that you can like sit and have dinner with and like pick their brains. He's definitely one of them. He's like so prolific and creative in like different areas, and that I really appreciate that. And he's from Queens. Shout out Queens, New York, where I'm recording this from as we speak. but yeah, just to take, like, he's been acting wise, he's been in shows like Friends, and he was in the movie Rudy and Avengers, Iron Man, Spider-Man, etc. The movie Chef with John Leguizamo. But I want to take a step back to take an even deeper dive into that, because a lot of these things he's either produced or directed as well, which is even more impressive. So from a writing perspective, he wrote the movie Swingers, and I'm just rattling off a couple things from his IMDb here. Couples Retreat, which is a comedy. Chef, which I just mentioned. Oh, he has this dope series on Netflix called Chef that he co-hosts with Chef Roy Choi, which is great. They go, for example, to like different restaurants and eateries like Wolfgang's and learn how to make a steak the way Wolfgang makes a steak, and he walks you through the whole process from A to Z. Franklin's Barbecue to learn how to smoke brisket. Like, it's a dope show. And what I like the most about it is that him and Roy Choi have like this rapport and this great chemistry. And then in every episode they do that. They go to like a famous place or whatever. And they also then go back to, I believe, Favreau's home, and they always make something. And they give you the ingredients of everything they make, and they make it together, and then they just like shoot the shit while they're cooking. And it's very freeform, podcast-like, which is probably why I gravitate towards it most. And it's a really dope show. It's called The Chef Show, or Chef, on Netflix. You guys should check that out as well. And those are some of the things that he's written. Then here's just a few things that he's directed. He directed Elf, which is a classic Christmas movie starring Will Ferrell, which, by the way, I saw like this, which I believe was also on Netflix, this like how it got made background story on the movie Elf. And he not only directed it, but he was like the glue that came in and made that movie happen and made it what it is, which again is an absolute classic. And what I appreciate most here is coming up, because it's like, it shows like the arc of creativity that he has. He can go from a classic Christmas movie to a comedy to action movies like Iron Man 2, both of which he directed, The Jungle Book, The Lion King, the 2019 like reboot that was like, like animated with realistic looking like animals or whatever, which I didn't really care for, but it's still dope, right? That's like a cool thing to have as a notch on the old creativity belt. And by the way, Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2, which I believe like just completely revamped the whole like Marvel series and gave birth to, in large part due to Iron Man, Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr., but obviously with Jon Favreau at the helm as the director, had a lot of influence in what that franchise became, in my opinion. The Avengers movies, etc. And he was also an executive producer on The Avengers Endgame, The Avengers Infinity War, The Jungle Book, Iron Man 3, The Avengers, Chef, The Chef Show, and it goes on and on and on. And then he creates this series, wrote and created the series, The Mandalorian. And it's like Disney Plus's flagship show. It's like, I believe, their first original like series or whatever. Or at least the first one that was a hit. But I think it was the very first one. And again, I'm not into Star Wars stuff, but the character looked dope. Like, he has like a really cool look to him. There was like a little hype behind it. And I was like, fuck it, let me watch the first episode. And I did so with my wife. And we were both like super into it. And she's someone else that she's never even seen like any of the Star Wars movies. And I say that, and I keep mentioning that, not to shit on any of the previous Star Wars movies, but because I think it's that much more impressive that it didn't come to it with the weight or expectations or just fandom of the Star Wars franchise behind us. We're just like, well, let's just watch this show, give it a shot. And its ability to not only captivate you and bring you in, but make you a fan, I think is that much more impressive because we didn't come with that fandom baggage. And it's a show that's already won like 7 Primetime Emmy Awards and a bunch of other awards. But I want to tell you guys a bit about the cast and crew here. So the writers on it, which I always want to shout out when I speak about movies and shows and stuff like that. Like I said, it was written and created by Jon Favreau. He's written on all 18 episodes. George Lucas, the creator of the Star Wars franchise, has written on all 18 episodes. And then you have 3 other writers that have written on about 2 episodes apiece, 1 episode for one of them. And the writers are Rick Famuyiwa, Dave Filoni, which is also one of the directors I'm going to mention in a bit, and Christopher L. Yost. Shout out to those writers for creating a hell of a series. Now, the directors, which I thought was really interesting and something that Jon Favreau purposely did, was he worked with a team of 6 directors. So you have himself, who directed an episode, but those 6 directors directed 2 to 3 episodes apiece. And then there were like 1 or 2 like guest directors, one of which, by the way, was Carl Weathers, which is an actor on the show, which those of you who may not know him by name is the guy that played Apollo Creed in the Rocky series. And if you don't know who that is, then press stop and stop listening to this podcast right now. So I want to shout out these directors, which are Rick Famuyiwa, which is also wrote one of the episodes that I just mentioned, Dave Filoni, Bryce Dallas Howard, which, by the way, is the daughter of the iconic Ron Howard, Deborah Cho, Taika Waititi, Peyton Reed, Robert Rodriguez, and Carl Weathers, and of course Jon Favreau. And what's dope about this like group of directors that he put together is that stood out to me immediately was the diversity of them. So you have a couple women, 1 white, 1 Asian. You have a couple dudes, 1 black, 1 Australian, white Australian, and another white guy. And by white guy, I'm just referring as a white guy to like a North American white guy. And to me, it's just super interesting to see such a diverse looking group of people that all came around this common cause and common interest and were part of creating such a beautiful, well done project. It's kind of like a microcosm of how society should function, right? The actors are super dope. Like I mentioned, Carl Weathers is in it. The guy that plays the Mandalorian is Pedro Pascal, which is the guy that played Javier Peña, the cop from the Narco series, or not the cop, the DEA agent. Gina Carano, the UFC fighter or MMA fighter. Well, yeah, it was UFC. She's in it. She has a dope role. Nick Nolte plays the voice of a character which, by the way, has the character's name is, where is it? Kuil, which is something else that I know Star Wars nerds probably gush over when they see it, that I don't fully appreciate, because again, I haven't watched the movies like that, but they, as an homage to the movies, they sprinkle in like these secondary and tertiary characters from the movies that didn't really get much play. They were just like background characters, but they sprinkle them in throughout this series in more prominent roles. And the Quill character is one of those type of characters, which Nick Nolte plays the voice. A woman actually, like a smaller, it's like not a dwarf, but a smaller looking like being, and like a very petite small woman plays the actual character, the movement of the character, but she has a like very elaborate mask on, and the mask has two other people controlling it remotely, and one person controls the mouth moving and another person controls the eyebrows and the ears moving, something like that. And just the orchestration between those 3 or 4 people to pull off this one character, I find so like dope, because they all have to be in sync, like just right, just to pull off the flow and the movement and the speaking of this one character. I thought that was so cool. And then it's a similar type of setup with Baby Yoda, which I'm sure you guys have probably seen like memes of, or seen them on t-shirts or something like that. It's like this really cute looking version of Baby Yoda. Yoda is like that little green creature from the Star Wars movies that has the really big ears. In the second season, spoiler alert, I'm gonna say it now if you haven't seen it yet, fast forward a bit. But in the second season, you find out that it's not actually Baby Yoda, it's Baby Grogu, which is a descendant years away of Yoda's. Like he's the same, like type of creature, same species. And anyway, that character is, it's a little puppet, and there's one person controlling the way it walks and moves. And there's 3 people controlling it at any given time. One person controls his mouth and his eyebrows. Another person controls his eyes and his ears. And that's how they make the magic of Baby Yoda actually happen. And I thought that was pretty cool. Now, the dopest thing, and again, this was driven and pushed forth by Jon Favreau, and it's not maybe his original idea, as he explained in this like post-show, like roundtable show that they have about the creation of the Mandalorian series, which I also highly recommend if you're into like behind the scenes like type of stuff, which I really am, to see like how the sausage gets made. He breaks down that different people were working on different aspects of this thing, but in this show, like he had enough people around him that were willing to help bring the concept or idea to fruition, and they pulled it off. And what they did was develop a brand new shooting technology. So a brand new way on how to shoot movies and TV shows, etc. And I liken it to how the Wachowski brothers, at the time, I think now sisters, I'm not sure, but at the time, the Wachowski brothers, in writing and directing The Matrix, the iconic Matrix, created a new way of shooting fight scenes and action scenes that revolutionized the way we've ever seen fight and action scenes since then, with that like 360 view of like cameras of how they, people like go to fight and jump, and they like sort of pause and suspend themselves in air in like gravity, and you have like a 360 view of them and stuff like that. Like they invented that. They created that during the filming of that movie. So I liken this, what Jon Favreau and team developed, this new shooting technology, to that. And what they did was combine motion capture imaging, or a motion capture camera, with a video game engine and green screen. So what that did essentially, and I'm, definitely no camera or videographer or expert or anything like that, so I might be fucking up the terminology a bit, but the gist of it, what I got from it, the explanation that I heard was that allowed the crew to capture footage from within a virtual environment. And they use this video game engine which renders, meaning like from, video games, that renders images in real time. So, and they showed like footage of like the studio and like stuff like that they worked in. And picture like a planetarium looking place where you have a set, but instead of it being like all green screen all around, you have LED like screens that actually change. And if you want mountains, you'll see mountains. If you want sunrise or sunset, you'll see that. If you want to see the stars and the plane, the the ships going, light speed, like you'll see that. So from a shooting perspective, you have like endless applications that I can't even begin to pretend to understand, but just like the scope that you have to work within is that much more or less confined. And what's interesting from the actor's perspective, and I believe it was Giancarlo Esposito who is in this and he was in Breaking Bad. He played Gus Fring, the Boyos Hermanos guy. He said that from an actor's perspective, it's dope because you don't have to pretend as much. And I think Carl Weathers like touched on this as well. Like you get the instant feedback of what you're supposed to be seeing. So traditionally, if you're in a studio with a green screen and you're supposed to be like looking at a sunset, for example, like you have to, as an actor, pretend that there's a sunset there. But now with this footage, with this new technology that they've created, like you actually see the sunset there as an actor, so you can play off of that. Then in post-production, this is how efficient it is, like across the board, from an acting perspective, a directing perspective, cinematography perspective, and even in post, you don't have to add in as much scenery and stuff like that you would traditionally with like a green screen, how they like in post-production like impose that onto the green screen and fill in what the actor was imagining, etc., because it's already actually there in the actual shot. And I think that's so dope, and we're going to see like that technology continue to be used and evolve, and I believe it's going to be something that's going to allow productions with maybe a smaller budget be able to create that much higher quality content because of how efficient this technology proved to be. Anyway, that's my little spiel on The Mandalorian. It's dope. I highly recommend it. There are 2 seasons out right now. The second season is 2 or 3 episodes shorter than the first season. So it's only like 6 or 7 episodes. The first season is like 8 or 9 or 10, which I didn't like just from a consistency standpoint. I didn't like that aspect of it, but I'm guessing because of like COVID and stuff like that, they may have had to have cut it short. But either way, that's just from a selfish perspective, right? Like I wanted to see more episodes. It's a dope series. I highly recommend it. It is available on Disney Plus, and you guys should check it out. Vampires vs. the Bronx. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Vampires in the Bronx. It's kind of like that thought that you had when you heard the term vampires in Brooklyn. It sounds kind of corny and cheesy, and it kind of was, but it also kind of wasn't. And it could be because this movie played to a bunch of my biases, being Dominican myself, being from New York. I'm not from the Bronx, I'm from Queens, but still New York, home team. It was very Dominican, which I appreciate, and not Dominican like Jeffrey Wright playing Peoples Hernandez in Shaft, even though I thought he did a good job. And again, that was probably just because it played towards my bias of being something really Dominican. But yeah, it was really Dominican. My guy Mero from Desus and Mero was one of the main characters in it. He played a bodeguero named Tony. There was another bias for you right there. I mean, come on. You have a Dominican guy named Tony in your movie. I'm going to sing you praises forever. It was written and directed by Osmani Rodriguez. There's one more writing credit on the movie as well, and that's to, I hope I'm pronouncing his first name right, Blaise Hemingway. And the movie came out around, it's available on Netflix. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but it came out around Halloween. And the premise is that there is this real estate company moving into the Bronx and gentrifying it. And it definitely has like a double meaning of just gentrification in general, of how, folks move into certain quote unquote bad areas and start fixing it up. And then when property values go up, the people that were originally from that neighborhood can no longer afford it, and they have to move out and move on. And this happens over and over again, right? It's like turnover of communities, or turnover at a community level, rather, which is not cool, right? But what the funny spin and where like the vampires come in in this is that, it's this real estate company that's moving in. It's buying up a lot of buildings in this neighborhood in the Bronx. And the buildings are getting like boarded up, and, people are leaving the neighborhood. And these kids, these three kids, kind of like young teenage kids, one of them winds up witnessing this like group of drug dealers that go to or are going to attempt to like rob this like gothic looking guy, and that guy winds up being a vampire, winds up killing the drug dealer guy, and then this kid witnesses that, and he's trying to tell people that there's vampires in the neighborhood. Nobody believes him. Then he goes snooping around, and then him and his friends find out that the folks that own the real estate company, that's just a front, that they really are vampires, and they just go neighborhood to neighborhood and literally and figuratively suck the lifeblood out of the neighborhood, and they take it upon themselves to try to save the neighborhood and kill these vampires. So it's a cool kind of homage to, I don't know if you guys remember a movie that I used to really like growing up called The Lost Boys from back in the day, from 1987, with Corey Feldman and I believe Corey Haim as well, that seemed to have been in like all the fucking 80s movies back then. It's just kind of like a cool homage to that. And then again, I just fucking love the Dominican-ness of it. And they didn't like play any of it down. They didn't like water it down. It was like very unapologetically Dominican, which I really appreciated like crazy. And like they had a couple things. They had the bodega, like I mentioned, the bodeguero named Tony, that's always giving people shit on credit, like store credit. If you grew up like near bodegas growing up, I remember as a kid going to the bodega with my cousin that lived in Brooklyn and East New York, and we used to go and like she didn't have to pay right away. Like the bodeguero like knew her, and he would go and my mom said to send her a pack of cigarettes and give me a bag of chips and she'll come pay you later or whatever, like stuff like that. And I had a similar type of deal actually in Queens, in Jamaica, Queens, on Suffin. I used to work there, and around the corner there was a bodega. We had that type of relationship as well. So they had like that. They had the cliche bodega cat, just like chilling, lying around. All bodegueros have a cat to like help kill like rodents and shit like that in the store. You had the neon sign from the bodegas that like Mero definitely references all the time on Jesus and Mero, and they, as an homage to that, they on that show, Jesus and Mero, each of their illustrious guests get a neon sign at the end of every episode where they can like say like a phrase or whatever they want to say, and that's like their neon sign they get like plastered above them before they like leave the episode. So that was a cool part of the movie. Peralta clothing, which I bought a few pieces from, which my brother put me on to. I've gotten my kids a couple shirts from there. It's like a Dominican designer. I'll link to their website in the episode notes if anybody wants to check them out. But I saw a couple of like Nueva York tees from Peralta clothing, which was cool to see. Guys on the corner playing dominoes. It was like, a really funny scene that my wife and I were like cracking up at were like when the kid, he's like running around, he's trying to tell like people in the neighborhood about the vampires and stuff like that, and he passes by these two guys that are like playing dominoes or whatever, or I think at that point they had been playing dominoes, but they were just like chilling or whatever on the block, and he like tells them, like the music stops, and he tells the kid tells these guys, don't stay out after dark because something is gonna happen or whatever, blah 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 blah, after 9 o'clock, and go home and this and that and the other. And he like says something to them like to that effect. I'm like butchering it a bit, and then he leaves, and then the kid leaves on his bike. Then it pans back to the two guys, and they're like, yo, that was mad vague. Like, I don't know, the way they shot that scene and the way he said what you didn't expect him to say, but it was kind of like spoofing that cliche moment in movies where the protagonist is trying to tell everybody about what's going on. It was fucking hilarious. I like that there was this girl that throughout the whole movie, she was just like doing IG posts. Like she had her, not a YouTube channel, but like a IG, like a live channel, I guess, or something like that. And it was called the Glow Updates. And like she was through that, like narrating everything that was going on in the neighborhood, and like knew everybody's tea and shit. I thought that was a pretty cool touch. And at the end, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it yet, it was really funny to see the like neighborhood come together, and there's like this fight team between the neighborhood and the vampires. And the bodeguero, Tony, spoiler alert, Meryl dies because one of the vampires gets them. And he actually had hanging up like as a shrine a bat of Sammy Sosa's from when he was in that home run race, title race with Mark McGuire. He had like one of those bats like as a shrine or whatever, and he was like trying to use that to like kill the vampire, and that winds up being like a piece of that winds up being what kills like the head vampire at the end. So that was cool. But it was, they did like a funny montage of like the neighborhood like coming together to fight the vampires, and it was like a mother with curlers in her hair, and like the two guys playing dominoes came and like broke a domino table on top of one of the vampires and said "Capicua," and it was just like cheesy, funny, corny fun. And I definitely recommend it. You guys should check it out. It's called, again, Vampires in Brooklyn, and is available on Netflix. The Chi, Season 3. Now, I love Lena Waithe. I sing her praises all the time on this show. I think she's so dope. She's a great creative, but she's more than that. She's a visionary. She's driven. She's passionate about what she does. There's purpose behind what she does. She knows and understands and creates from a place of understanding the importance of seeing yourself on screen, which she speaks to a lot. And by seeing yourself, I mean as a minority, as a black or brown person, as a queer person, as a gay person, as whatever minority that you are, that whatever marginalized group that you are a part of, how important it is to see yourself on screen. And in this season 3 of The Chi, available on Showtime, I appreciated her ability to do that so much more. Kevin and Keisha's mom, which I believe is Nina, she gets married in the beginning of the episode, and she's a lesbian. So she's marrying another woman, obviously. And the season, episode 1, starts off with a beautiful ceremony of that wedding. I was really interested to see, before I get into all the other types of ways that she showed people themselves, people from different backgrounds themselves. I was really interested to see, and I know I mentioned it last time I covered The Chi, probably season 2 or 1 and 2, how they were going to quote unquote kill off Brandon's character. Brandon, for those of you who don't know, played by Jason Mitchell, was one of the main protagonists of season 1 and 2. And there was a sexual harassment type scandal with him in real life with his co-star, which played his girlfriend on the show, Jerica Little on the show. Her name is Tiffany Boone. Pretty much, lawsuits ensued and stuff like that, and he got kicked off the show. And this was after season 2. And I was really interested to see how they were going to like play that off, if they were just not going to mention it or like what was going to happen. And they literally killed him off. They show, I think the very next scene after the lesbian wedding reception, or maybe it was the scene right before it, but I think it was the scene right after, because I remember it starting off like on a good note. They cut to Brandon's funeral, and they have his picture there, and his mom giving a eulogy after losing both her kids, and something that was very telling of a reality of Southside Chicago, with all the violence and killings that go on there, that they touch on here in this episode, is that she asks the folks at the funeral, by show of hands, raise your hand if you've lost one son, and a ton of people raise their hands. And then she asks, raise your hands if you've had to bury two children, and then less, but still a lot of people raise their hands. And that kind of just is a powerful message that rings true to that climate and some of the realities plaguing some of those neighborhoods in Southside Chicago and in other places, obviously in the country and in the world. But it's known as quote unquote Chirac for a reason, right? Although that's not to say that all of Chicago is like that, obviously, but it's definitely a part of it. A large through line of this episode was Keisha's character, or a large, what do I want to say, like a storyline throughout this season was Keisha, Kevin's sister, disappearing being kidnapped, and them not knowing if she was killed, and they're like searching for her throughout the entire season, and just showing how that type of situation just devastates families and tears them apart, and how scary as a parent that would be to go through something like that, God forbid, which again is another reality of shit that happens, right? She was at a bus stop waiting for the bus. It was getting later in the day and wound up getting snatched up. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen season 3, fast forward a bit. But then we find out that she's been, kept in a basement, kept captive by her abductor, who was raping her, essentially torturing her, obviously had her shackled. This creepy but clean-cut looking dude that was a fucking sociopath. Another storyline is Jake's older brother coming back to town, wanting to look after Jake, and he is in a relationship with a trans woman. And I think creating that dynamic within the show was very important because, again, playing to the idea of how important it is to see yourself on TV. I think especially in like Black and brown communities where, being trans or queer or gay or anything other than straight is more taboo. I think it's that much more important to have roles like this on the screen, small screen, big screen, etc., so that folks from those communities can feel that much more comfortable with being them, Imagine what it would be like to be a trans or gay or queer person and thinking, not seeing yourself like on TV or reading about yourself in a book. And by yourself, I mean, other people like you, just thinking you're a freak and you're crazy and stuff like that. And, that's why suicide rates in communities like that are higher than the norm, etc. And, it may be like a small thing to do, but a very powerful thing to do. Or it may be seen as a small thing to do. I don't think it's a small thing to do, to create stories and projects like this that includes characters that we're not, used to seeing. I think it's super important, and, hats off to Lena Waithe for having the foresight and gumption to do so. Lena Waithe actually makes a cameo in this season. She has a few scenes. She plays a politician running for mayor against Perry, whose character is like the drug kingpin of the neighborhood, and now he's running for mayor. But he's like the drug kingpin from the shadows, and puts forth this clean-cut image, but he's not. And Lena Waithe's character, runs against him, and it touches on the corruption within politics, the power dynamics between power and money and influence. It's interesting to see the kids, the 3 main characters, Kevin, Papa, and Jake, which are really young during the first season, and even the second season. But in this third season, they like all like hit puberty like crazy, and you see them like a bit older, and they're like more like coming of age, and getting into girls now, and smoking weed a little bit, getting into trouble, like losing innocence at the same time. Like in Papa's case, for example, his father's his hero, and his father's a pastor of a small church, and he sees his father taking money from Lena Waithe's character, like an envelope of cash, and after Lena Waithe like speaks to the congregation at his church, and they're doing it like on the sly, and he confronts his dad and asks him, "Hey, what's that money for?" And his pops pretty much tells him, stay out of grown folks' business, and his dad winds up getting like arrested at the end of the episode, but then is able to go back home. But it like tainted his image of his father to him, which he held to such like high regard and perfection, like on this pedestal of unrealistic perfection. It like humanized him a bit, and I guess like made him a little jaded towards his dad, but also gave him the realization that the world isn't a rosy, picture perfect place. People are flawed. Emmett Washington, played by Jacob Lattimore, which is like one of the most charismatic actors I've seen in a minute. He's like stealing the show now, he had a like major role in the show. Lala had a cameo. He like wind up partnering up with Lala, who was like running like a neighborhood restaurant out of her house and made like banging food. And he worked at Sonny's chicken shop, and he wound up speaking to the landlord. Actually, let me take a step back. And spoiler alert, by the way, again. So Emmett was working at Sonny's, right? Chicken spot. Sonny like looked out for him, gave him a job. He was, he's never been into like crooked shit. Sonny was really good to him. And Emmett started like opening up Sonny's at night, selling chicken on the low to try to make it like extra money. And like he's always been a hustler, but he's never been like into drugs or anything like that, like selling drugs and like gangster shit. And then he partners up with Lala, and then they're having these like backyard barbecues at Sonny's and stuff like that. But then he winds up raising like the electricity bills and like everything, right? Because he's using all of Sonny's like equipment and shit like that. Sonny winds up finding out about it and fires him. And they have like this kind of like breakup. And what I thought was kind of grimy, but at the same time, like business is business type of thing. Emmett went to the landlord, which was played, actually, I just remembered, by Lil Rel. He went to the landlord of Sonny's shop and, offered the landlord, because Sonny was behind on some rent, and offered the landlord to take over Sonny's spot and give him the lease to the place, which the landlord, wound up agreeing to. Emmett partnered up with Lala, and they opened up this place. And he seems to be, like, doing well. He winds up proposing to his girl, Tiff, at the end of the show, which I believe is pregnant. Was she pregnant? No, she has a kid. She's not pregnant. They have a kid already. But he seems to be getting his shit together a little bit. As usual, his dick is getting him in trouble. He winds up fucking Lala, which is like an older woman, somewhat established. And she's kind of like, whatever, it was just sex, keep it moving type of thing. But he's kind of like a little bit sprung on her. Probably because she's so like, whatever, it was just sex. And has that like type of like attitude about what happened. But obviously that something has to give in that situation, in that triangle fucked up situation, right? Either the business is going to go left, or his relationship with Tiff, which has never been better, is going to sour when the news breaks of what happened and whatever. But that was definitely an interesting storyline there. And then it ended on such a sad note, with sad but like expected note, with Ronnie, which is an individual, was another, big character during the first couple seasons. He was kind of like a low-life drunk that, came home from the military, kind of fucked up in the head and, turned to alcohol. He was an alcoholic and kind of sort of lived off his grandma and, doing odd jobs and stuff like this. But, went on streaks of like getting his shit together, but it would always fall back into alcoholism and stuff like that. He wound up killing a kid in the very first season, accidentally, but he did kill him because he thought the kid killed his son and stole his son's chain. R.I.P. Coogie. Then that wound up coming full circle when in this season he finally got like past the hump of getting his shit together. Like it really seemed like he wasn't getting his shit together. He was like about to get the fuck out of Dodge, start a new life type of thing. At the very end, actually leaving the new chicken spot, or the new restaurant spot of Emmett and Lala's, he winds up getting shot in the back of the head. And it brings full circle the whole killing of that kid Coogie, because the kid who killed him, killed Ronnie and said that that's for Coogie. And, he bounced. And that's how the season wrapped. It was really good. Shout out to The Shy. Shout out to Lena Waithe, the creator of the show. And my bad for not saying so in the beginning, but I wanted to shout out the writers of the show as well. It's been a few seasons, and it's already been greenlit for the fourth one. So there's a few different writers, but here we go. Lena Waithe, Justin Hillian, Marcus Gardley, Casalina Cathy, Kisaki, Ricardo Gamboa, Nambi Kelly, Dime Davis, Clink Henderson, Ayanna Floyd, Adam Glass, Elwood Reed, J. David Shanks, Joseph C. Wilson, T.J. Brady, Jewel Coronel, Rashid Newson, Mike Flynn, Sylvia L. Jones, Terry Coop, Jade Brannion, and Lolis Eric Ellie. Dope show. Check it out on Showtime. Definitely keep doing your thing. And that is episode 169, folks, of the Spun Today Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, tell me about it. Hit me up on Twitter at Spun Today. Don't forget to rate and review the show. And I'm going to leave you with a few different ways you can help support the show if you so choose. Peace. Hey folks, Tony here. If you're enjoying the show, do me a favor. Rate and review it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. If you'd like to help out the show in other ways, I'll give you a one-stop shop of sorts to do so. Go to spuntoday.com/support. That's where you'll find a ton of different ways to help support this show, such as shopping on Amazon. If you do any shopping on Amazon, like most of the world, I ask that you do so by clicking on any of the Amazon banners on my website. This will take you to Amazon, where you can do your shopping like you normally do. It will not cost you anything extra, but I will get credit for driving traffic to their website. Speaking of Amazon, they fulfill a bunch of the merch that I have available. If you go to spuntoday.com/support, you're going to find a brand new merch section where you'll find the iconic Podcasts vs. Anybody super soft premium cotton t-shirt. You'll also find the legendary Spun Today Podcast tee, which is in the style of the New York City plastic thank you bags logo. For my fellow Dominicans out there, I have a dope Dominican Escudo t-shirt. You know where the Lacoste or Polo shirts have their little logo? Picture that, but instead a Dominican Escudo. All available now in a variety of different colors for men and women in all sizes. In the Spun Today merch section, which again is at spuntoday.com/support, you'll also find a bunch of other t-shirt designs, long sleeve t-shirts, short sleeve t-shirts, color changing coffee mugs, and much, much more. Check out all the merch at spuntoday.com/support. All of my short stories can be found at spuntoday.com/short stories. The free writing pieces that I read, share, and review during the free writing session episodes of this show can be found at spuntoday.com/free writing. There you can read all the pieces that made the podcast as well as tons and tons of others. My books are available in any digital format of your choice, whether it's Kindle, Apple's iBooks, Kobo, you name it. They're also available in paperback. You can check them out at spuntoday.com/books. My debut novel, Fractal, is a sci-fi time travel story of a group of righteous travelers that attempt to right the wrongs of the injustices of the past. My nonfiction, Make Way For You, is a collection of tips for getting out of your own way. So if you need some motivation, inspiration, and a good old-fashioned kick in the ass, that'll be the read for you. Again, go to spuntoday.com/books or search for those titles on Amazon. Another great and free way that you can help support this show is by subscribing to my newsletter by going to spuntoday.com/subscribe. You'll get a photo, podcast, video, quote, and word of the week every single Monday at noon. What else do you have to look forward to on a Monday? Plus, you'll be the first to know whenever I publish a new book. And if for whatever reason you choose to, you can unsubscribe at any time. Go to spuntoday.com/subscribe, drop in your email address, and you'll get the very next one. At spuntoday.com/support, you'll also find links to my Patreon, Ko-fi, and PayPal donation pages. Patreon and Ko-fi allow you to make recurring donations per episode, and you even get some bonus content for doing so. PayPal allows you to make a one-time donation to the show. For my fellow writers and creatives out there, a really cool way for you to be featured on this show is to respond to my 5-question Spun Today questionnaire. I'll read your responses on a future episode of the show and share them with the Spun Today community. Think about it. If your responses could potentially spark inspiration in someone else, why not share that? To do so, go to spuntoday.com/questionnaire. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Spun Today on both those platforms. Check out and like the Spun Today Facebook page at facebook.com/Spun Today. I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the Spun Today YouTube page. Just search for Spun Today on YouTube or click on any of the YouTube icons on my website. There, you'll not only get the full versions of this podcast, but you'll also get bonus content like shortened episode clips and much, much more. And as always, folks, substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening. I love you, Aiden.
I love you, Daddy.